What if I told you that there is a story that is rarely told? A story full of dark secrets and mysterious events involving black fire. This fire is not just an element, it holds the power to change destinies and open doors to worlds we don't even know about. A man stood in the street wearing only a t-shirt and pajama pants. He was holding his terrified daughter in his arms. Firefighters were trying to fight the blaze. Somewhere out there in the house, his wife was left behind. He didn't make it in time and couldn't save her. For the rest of his life he remembered his wife's eyes, sad and pleading. All that was left of the house were coals and a charred wall. The woman's body was found, but it was difficult to identify her. The fire department's official conclusion was that the wiring had shorted out. Father and daughter left this town for the other side of the country. Tanya watched TV and the evening went on as usual. After work she came home, had dinner and a movie, and went to bed no later than 11. And so it had been for years. She was 35, unmarried, and had no children. Sometimes she felt sad and cried quietly into her pillow about her fate. That evening, while she was peacefully watching a movie, there was a pop in the hallway. She jumped at the sound and immediately smelled the odor of burnt plastic. A few minutes later, the desk lamp in the bedroom was smoking. The fire had started so quickly that the woman floundered around the apartment, not knowing what to do. Though no, what to do she knew, she was just confused. It had been quiet for a few years now. Suddenly she calmed down, pulled herself together, and called the fire department. The firemen arrived quickly, and the room was hardly damaged. They advised her to install a fire alarm system and check all the wiring in the apartment. All the next day Tanya was busy with cleaning and airing. Thoughts were swirling in her head and she kept coming back to the same thing. The woman had survived many fires in her life, from small domestic fires to major ones. She had scars on her body from the burns. It was as if fire had haunted her since she was a young child. She experienced her first fire at the age of 3 and barely remembered it. Her mother died in that fire, leaving her and her father alone. Since then, she's had a good relationship with fire. She even bought an electric stove. In one of the fires that happened a few years ago, her father was seriously injured. After the hospital, Andrei Nikolaevich moved to his native village. Tatiana often comes to visit and help her father. Her father never talks about her mother's death or even about fires. Having cleaned the apartment, the woman seriously considered installing a fire alarm system. Having studied the advertisements, the very next day she waited for the specialists. By lunchtime, 2 men arrived and told her in detail about the different types of systems. "How often do you have these?" "Fires, I mean," asked the man who introduced himself as Valera. "Yes, since I was a child. I've been through a lot of fires, and I should be friends with fire by now. But I'm just more afraid of it," replied Tanya. "Buy a fire extinguisher just in case." "You should see a witch, it's not clean," said the fireman. "Don't look at me like that, I've seen a lot of things in my career, and fire is a strong element." Tatiana heeded the man's advice and began to search. As it turned out, witchcraft is quite a popular occupation, and from the prices attacked tetanus. Having found nothing suitable on the internet, Tanya began to look for friends. "Here's her phone number, her name is Lachi. She's a gypsy, a real Shovakani," said a colleague at work. "Who?" Tanya almost laughed. "A Shovakani is a gypsy witch. Believe me, she's very strong. She saved my life and I pray for her. Tell her it's from me." Tatiana contacted the gypsy woman, and she listened to the call without any surprise and agreed to come. She lived in a neighboring town, so they met that evening. It was as if a fire had burst into the apartment, and Tanya recoiled. There was a lot of everything about Lachi. Bright, long-haired, with scarlet lipstick, and very charismatic. She was beautiful, some kind of wild beauty. The life in her was so vibrant. "Here I am, CCC. I'm Lachi," the gypsy introduced herself. "I'm Tanya, and what's an ERT?" "Gypsy ambulance," Lachi laughed out loud. "It's your father, he knows more than he's letting on." "You should talk to him," Lachi said. "Dad lives in the village, and after one fire he never recovered," Tatiana said with sadness in her voice. "We can go to see him tomorrow." "Great." Lachi smiled broadly, but her eyes remained wary. Something was bothering her. She'd seen a lot of things in her vision that made her conclude that this wasn't just a fire spell. There was something more serious here. A fire demon. Lachi had encountered such a demon many years ago and she remembered it well. She decided to find out and help by all means. The gypsy stayed at Tanya's house for the night because it was late and it was too late to go looking for a hotel. Tanya made the guest a bed on the sofa in the living room and lay down in the bedroom. Suddenly Lachi felt someone else's presence, and it wasn't a living person. Something evil and ancient was in the apartment. Lachi opened her eyes and stared into the darkness. She saw tiny sparks flaring up and turning into small blue flames. Tongues of flame flared here and there, and suddenly the curtains flared up. Lachi jumped to her feet and rushed to the bathroom for water. A hissing sound was heard from the room, and when the gypsy entered the room, the mini fire was out. Tanya was standing holding a fire extinguisher. "I had to buy one," she explained with a sigh. "Does this happen often?" Lachi asked. "Once a week, consistently? I can't sleep after this. I'll go to the kitchen," Tanya said, and Lachi went with her. The clock showed 4:30 in the morning. The hostess made coffee and sandwiches which they never touched. You see, fire is a powerful element. It is a colossal energy, including vital energy. One force of fire destroys everything in its path, the other is peaceful, it gives warmth and life. Each nation has its own beliefs, legends, and omens associated with fire. In witchcraft, fire is a very powerful force, deadly. It's not easy to get rid of it, but you can. But what you have here, I can't even find the words to describe what's going on. "It's not just a spell," Lachi said, staring into her coffee mug. "I've always been afraid of fire, ever since I was a kid." "It's probably just intuition," said Tanya. "Not only that, you're being guarded by someone on the other side. Most likely your mother. There's nothing stronger than a mother's love to break any curse or spell. That's why you're still alive," the gypsy woman said quietly. The women talked about Tatiana's and her father's past until morning. Early in the morning they went to the village. It was a short drive, only 40 minutes. Their father, Ivan Maximovich, was sitting on a bench in front of the house, as if he had been waiting for them. "I was waiting for you, I knew you would come soon," said the man, looking at Lachi. Ivan Maximovich's face was disfigured by burns, his hands were also scarred. In his youth he had been the first handsome man. The man sat his daughter and Lachi down in the kitchen, made tea, and sat down in silence. "It's probably time to tell everything. You are a witch, aren't you?" he asked Lachi. "Shovihani, a gypsy witch," Lachi corrected him gently. "There are some differences. When you do mean things when you're young, you don't think it can come back. I had a brother a year older than me. He started dating Olya. I was dating Katya at the time. Olya and Katya are best friends, so it worked out so well. At first glance. We often went out in pairs, not because it was more interesting. I just fell in love with Olga. I couldn't live without her, but she was dating my brother. It was like a triangle or a square. Sashka, my brother, didn't know anything about it. Once I made up my mind and confessed my feelings to Ola, then she cried and replied that she loved me too. Then I think you can see how it ended. Neither she nor I did not want to offend Katya and Sanya, but you cannot hide, all the same will come out. It was a big scandal, it got to the point of a fight. Parents, by the way, supported Sasha. I left with Olya. First we rented a room, then we went to the city. At first I didn't notice anything special, sometimes there were minor troubles with fire, but it didn't come to anything serious. Tanya was born, I started earning well, we bought our own house. One day I got a call about my father's death. At the funeral nobody even came near me, everyone shunned me. My mother only said goodbye. "Don't come and be careful of the flames or you will burn." I didn't quite understand her then. I was choked with resentment, my mother was chilly towards me and Sasha. She didn't even ask me anything about her daughter. 6 months passed and I got the terrible news that my mother had died. She burned down in the house like the wiring was not in good working order. Sasha was living somewhere else at Katerina's. That's how it is. I buried my mother, I wanted to talk to my brother but I didn't. And with fire in our family began to happen quite wild things. Even where there was no fire at all, just a room. We thought we were going crazy. About 6 months before the tragedy, I was called to the hospital. It turned out Katya was in serious condition and wanted to talk. It was a difficult conversation. "You don't even know that Sasha died. He forbade to talk so you weren't informed. But that's not why I called you here. The sin is on me. Maybe if I repent, it'll be a little easier. Both Sasha and I hated you both to the whites of our eyes. For your betrayal, for your pain, for everything. That's how we got together. We lived, not as lovers but as obsessed with hatred. Sasha became interested in witchcraft, went to all sorts of women. His mother, by the way, knew about it and supported him. Not a mother but an echidna. She knew how such things end. We did the ritual, we did everything the old witch told us to do. A day later my mother's house burned down and she died. Sasha started waking up screaming from nightmares. Pills didn't help. Alcohol didn't help either. He couldn't stand it. He took his own hands on himself. Soon I found out about my illness. Started treatment, but the doctors immediately said, chances are small, so I went to the women. They told me that this is my answer, punishment for that spoilage. Forgive me if you can, and take care of your family. A week later Katya died, and a few months later there was a fire and Olya died. Since then, I've been looking for a way to get rid of that demon and remove the spoil. Every year it gets worse and worse, it's too far gone. When they arrived in town, they first went to the hardware store, then to the grocery store. Lachi bought all sorts of things, like candles, nails, and salt. At Tatiana's house, Lachi spent a long time digging through her notes in a thick, worn notebook. From there she wrote out some words in Latin and began the ritual. Sit in silence, even if it will be scary, or on the contrary, will break laughter, keep silent. Even if you gag, but be silent, strictly ordered Lachi. This is all very serious, I understand. The smell of frankincense and sandalwood floated through the apartment, the heavy odor penetrated everywhere. Lachi whispered the words of the incantation, summoning the demon. On the table in front of her, on a makeshift altar, there was earth from a ficus tub, salt, nails, matches, and a bowl of water. She gathered all the elements together, and now she had to cleanse the earth of spoilage, to break the pact with the demon. The room was getting hotter by the minute, as if they were in an oven. Lachi spoke the words clearly, sweat streaming down her face. Tatiana froze, afraid to move. She was the first to notice the flames creeping up the walls. In a few minutes the fire engulfed the entire room. Tatiana was terrified, unable to scream or move. There's no smoke, she realized with surprise. The whole wall was engulfed in flames, in which some creature was clearly visible. It was wheezing and howling. Lachi almost shouted a spell, realizing that she had little strength left and the outcome might not be in her favor. She summoned the women of her kind to her aid and almost immediately felt a surge of strength. Suddenly the wall shuddered and the fire seemed to be drawn into the wall. All the flames that had encompassed the room were drawn into the wall. The room became dark and quiet. Tanya couldn't stand it and touched the wall. It's cold, Tatiana said confusedly. Of course, because it's a different fire. But it was hot and it managed to scare him. That's it now. Lachi pointed at the wall, along which cracks went. We cut the connection with him, he's gone. I've removed the spell too, but I need to reset it, and I've got things to do. Let's go. So in the night, they got into the car and set off on the gypsy witch's errands. For some reason, they drove to the river, from there to the graveyard, then out of town to some crossroads. So they drove till morning. At home, after taking a shower, both women fell into bed to sleep. Lachi took out from her bag a kit set of canvas cloth and handed it to Tatiana. Inside was an antique iron nail. Drive it yourself into the doorjamb of the front door. It is conspired. It will protect you not only from bad people but also from evil, including fires. If you move suddenly, take the nail with you, it's your protection, the gypsy woman said, and today you'll make friends with the firekeeper. Tanya obediently did everything the Shovihani told her to do. In the evening, taking their backpacks, Tanya and Lachi went to the village outside the city. Tatiana's father had prepared a place and firewood in advance, and built a huge fire by his standards. When the women arrived, he was already waiting for them. Father and daughter lit the fire together and recited the incantation Lachi had given them. Lachi, meanwhile, was watching them to see if everything was going well, for this was a dangerous ritual. Before Tanya's eyes, a clear silhouette appeared in the flames, and then the face of an old man, who looked at them with a slight grin. In the first seconds, the woman felt an icy, primal fear of this powerful and ruthless element, fire. And suddenly, her whole body and soul felt as if warmed after a long, cold day. Warmth spilled over her body, and it came from the fire. She fearlessly, for the first time in her life, stretched out her hands to the fire. After the ritual, Lachi was left alone for a few minutes. Closing her eyes, she disconnected from reality for a few seconds, and looked into the future. What she saw pleased her. Tanya would be fine, and her father would be fine too.